Hey quilters! So what I have today is a quick tutorial for you. Have you ever gotten a magazine or a book, for example like this one, or a PDF pattern that has templates instead of rotary cutting directions for your quilt, and you have no idea what to do with that? Many of us who have learned how to quilt in the last 10, 15, 20 years have learned how to use a rotary cutter, rotary mat, and acrylic rulers, sometimes with specialty rulers to cut out quilt pieces. But there are a lot of patterns out there that don't have specialty templates, or they cost extra, or you've got an older pattern that you want to use, and what you have instead of a whole specialty ruler is, something like this that has shapes on a piece of paper, and you're supposed to cut these out of your fabric. So how do you do it? It's actually not as hard as you might think. So first of all, this particular book, this is probably long out of print. If you have something in a book like this, the first thing I would do is go photograph or photocopy this. So take it to the copy shop. You want it on a piece of paper. Be careful, try to get it as flat as you can so that you don't have curving and get some distortion. But photocopy those pages 100%, no shrinking, no growing. Just photocopy it exactly the size that they print it in the book. Just quick note about these shrinking and growing. If you want to make the quilt pattern bigger, it's a little harder than just making it, 200% or 150%, because your seam allowances will get messed up. So for today, let's not talk about that. Let's just photograph it 100%. Or if you've got a PDF quilt pattern that came with a template sheet, you can just print that out. Now here is one that I have. That this particular template sheet comes with a 1-inch reference square. So what you're going to do with that is, before you print it out, first thing you're going to do is check to make sure that it printed out at the right size. Printers are notoriously finicky, and sometimes they like to stretch or shrink or grow things to fit on the page. So if you have a paper template or something you've printed and it has one of these reference squares, first thing you're going to want to do is actually take your quilting ruler, lay it right on top, verify that yes, indeed, that 1-inch square is 1 inch. If it's not, go check your printer settings, try it again. So there's a couple options. If you're not, I can also talk about at the end here. If you're not going to, we can do this with paper. Also, if you have something like a Cricut or a Silhouette, Brother Scan and Cut, or some kind of laser cutting, X-Tool, one of those kinds of you might be able to cut out templates out of a different material. This is a thin, very thin, it's kind of an acrylic material. I've used Mylar sheets before and cut pieces with my Cricut. I have a whole separate video on how to take a PDF pattern that you've got online and turn it into a scaled vector graphic, or SVG, that you can use on a Cricut. But for today, we're not gonna talk about cutting these, although you can use this the same as you can use this. But I'm going to show you the paper version, because this is, all of us either have a printer or you can take it to a library or a copy shop and have your pieces printed. So let's show you how to use these. First of all, get your scissors, not your fabric scissors. Nice pair of paper scissors, and we're going to carefully cut out our patterns as nicely as we can along those outer lines. This particular one also shows the seam lines as dashed lines underneath, so you can, if you were doing something like applique, maybe you would use the inside line, but we're going to piece this quilt, so this is going to be we're going to print out on the outside line. All right, let's see, line this up and try to cut straight and even. I find that if you do a lot of teeny tiny little cuts, then you get a very jagged edge. So I try to make longer, slower, straight cuts. That works best for me. All right, so now I've cut out my pattern. I'll do the rest of these later. Now I want to cut this out on fabric. So I have some, I'm just going to demonstrate on some scraps of green here. Looks like I had two. Normally I would press this a little better, but for the demonstration purposes today, I think this will work just fine. So let's see, I need to figure out how to lay out this template on my fabric. Now, depending on the pattern you're making, you may be concerned about the grain, which way the threads are going, whether you want to cut things on the bias, which is on the diagonal, or whether you want to keep certain elements straight up and down or straight across. If you're really scrappy and trying to use every last bit and piece of fabric, you might actually just want to fit it in wherever you can, and then just be very careful about stretching those pieces out if you do cut them off grain. Now, a quick hint for you is if you are trying to use something like a paper pattern and you want to do some fussy cutting, you actually can go back with your scissors and sort of cut yourself out a window. And that's where on this one, if you can see that dashed line, that is my seam line. If I were fussy cutting this pattern, I could cut the inside out on that dashed line and use it to help line up the fabric pattern. So for what I would want to see for the fussy cutting. But for this demonstration, I'm not doing that. We're just going to cut this out as though we're just gonna piece it normally. So no fussy cutting, nothing too fancy. Now, a couple things you can do at this point. We need to transfer this to the fabric. You can, at this stage, use some kind of weight to hold this down in place. For example, this is a pretty small piece, so it would be pretty tricky. That's my little earphone case. It's a little too big. Maybe a quarter, a coin of some kind might work here. And then you can, if you have a steady hand, you can line this up, and I'll see if I can do this without moving things around. Line this up very carefully. Use your eyeball the top of your blade along the seam line, and just cut it with your rotary cutter. Now, I know keep your fingers out of the way. Could get a little dicey without that acrylic ruler to keep your fingers safe. And you're slightly more likely to drive off into the paper. So don't choose this method if you don't feel comfortable with how steady your hands are, but it is absolutely an option at this point. So what I'm doing here is I am looking as close straight down as I can, lining up that really thin blade right on that edge, and then I'm just slowly cutting it out. Now, as a confession, I first picked up a rotary cutter, and this my big green mat here when I was still doing mostly garment sewing, probably 25 years ago now. They were it was a little newer, I think, at the time in quilting. They were a little pricey, but I was tired of cutting and pinning with pinning patterns to fabric and cutting them out with scissors. And I heard that it could be faster. And so I remember kind of, scraping together a coupon and, my spending money for the month, and picking up a mat and my first rotary cutter and a big ruler, which I still have. But for a long time then, I actually cut out sewing patterns, just kind of pinning my patterns down, just like I did with this little quilt piece. I would use some pattern weights and then cut around it with a rotary cutter. I actually got pretty good with it, including, all the little curves and divots and stuff. So this actually feels pretty familiar to me. So that was first method. That works pretty well. If you don't trust yourself not to cut into the pattern, cut into your pattern piece, you can also set it down. You can also trace around it. This is a friction pen, which will mostly erase with heat. So when I'm pressing the seams, this will go away. But for what I'm about to demonstrate, it really doesn't matter if you use a pencil or some other kind of marker that doesn't bleed. because what I'm doing here is I'm just going to trace this piece right along the outside edge. Easy peasy. Now, and this time I'm going to catch that little tip. This particular pattern has a little tip cut off to help align something. So let's trace this and up. So you can kind of see as I'm dragging the pen across, it's sort of wanting to stretch the fabric out of place. If I had a good little weight right there, that would help. So we're gonna, this is not probably the most highly precise method that there is, but hopefully you can see that where I've just traced it with the pen. Now I could either use a rotary cutter and just freehand it again, or I can get my fabric scissors and I can cut. Now since I had just traced barely to the outside edge of my paper piece, that's where the pen is. Now when I cut, I'm going to cut just barely to the end, like one thread in. So let's see, let's do that. Let's just, and again, try to make long, slow cuts rather than lots of teeny tiny little hacking things. Otherwise, you're more likely to have a jagged edge if you've got lots of short little cuts. And if you're cutting an outside corner, cut on past that corner. That way you can start in a clean spot. If it's an inside corner, just be really careful about not cutting too far. So I'm just going to line that up. And I feel like our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers were probably doing more of this method in years past, because rotary cutters are a fairly new invention. I will tell you that this is not probably as crazy precise as some of the rotary cutting methods, but because you're not lining up 1/8 of an inches on nice straight grains and cutting with really, it's a little looser than that. However, you can get a pretty good cut. See, that's how well that one fits. All right, so those are 2 methods. Now there is another way to use these, which can be really handy if you do want to use your rotary cutter and you're a little nervous about your cutting skills, or you're a little wobbly, but all you have is paper. This trick only works if you have straight edges. So in this case, it's a 90-degree triangle, or with like this square. I mean, this one would be pretty easy to cut out with just a rotary cutter, but I could use this template. What I'm going to do, hang on, let me grab a piece of masking tape. Masking tape. This is just the painter's kind of cheap stuff that we have for painting. I am going to line this up, and I'm going to use my ruler. This is a regular, nice fat rotary cutting ruler. What I'm doing is I'm carefully aligning these 2 edges on this corner, and I'm going to kind of tape that in place. Now, and I can mostly still see through that. I could probably use clear tape if that bothered me. And now let's show you how I can use this. Let's start. First, let me start by getting myself a nice clean straight edge to work with. I'm just going to use this edge here. I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to cut this on the bias. So this is just a scrap for me to test. I'm just going to, like I said, clean up an edge. So now I have a nice long straight edge. And now look. See, I'm actually going to turn this over because I think it'll make it easier to line up and see. I can see my paper is covered by that ruler. I can line up that long straight edge with the edge of my fabric, and then keep my fingers safely out of the way, use my rotary cutter, and cut this as though it were any other specialty ruler. That does not work. Oops, did I miss this? I missed a thread. Let's check that. Obviously, it's not going to work if I am cutting a curved piece. And definitely take extra care if the piece that you're cutting has like interior corners, so that you don't cut into it. But there you go. That's how you can use a paper template with a rotary cutter and ruler. So that can also be really helpful if you, for example, live in Europe and have, or other parts of the world where you have cutters and rulers that are in centimeters instead of inches, but you get templates in inches instead of centimeters, and your lines will never match up in that case. If that were the case, you can print out your templates, tape them onto your rulers, and still take advantage of your nice firm straight edges that way. So anyway, I hope this was helpful to you, and yeah, no, enjoy your quilting. If you are using old patterns or PDF patterns, share in the comments if you have any other tips for using templates. I'd love to hear about them. Thanks everybody. Happy quilting.